In the spring of 2024, a documentary researcher was sorting through dusty boxes at an estate sale in Salem, Massachusetts. The old Victorian home had belonged to the Hartwell family for more than 100 years, and their relatives were finally clearing out generations of stored belongings. The researcher, who focused on uncovering forgotten American stories, had trained herself to spot pieces of history hidden among ordinary objects. That Tuesday morning, she came across what looked like a simple family photograph tucked between worn recipe books. The sepia-colored image showed 5 people arranged in the formal pose common in 1910. There was a serious-looking father in a dark wool suit, 3 children of different ages dressed in their best clothes, and a mother seated clearly in the center. At first look, nothing appeared strange about the Whitmore family portrait. The father stood stiffly, just as men were expected to do at that time, with one hand resting gently on his wife's shoulder. The children, 2 boys and a girl, wore the calm, serious expressions required by long camera exposure times. Even their clothing suggested the quiet success of Boston's rising middle class during the industrial boom. But as the researcher studied the photograph more closely in natural light, she noticed something that made her pause. While every other family member looked straight into the camera with the usual calm of the era, the mother's eyes were focused elsewhere. Her stare was turned toward the left side of the frame, sharp and urgent, as if she were trying to signal something beyond the photographer's view. The researcher also noticed the woman's hands gripping the wooden arms of her chair with clear tension. Her knuckles looked nearly white against the dark fabric of her dress. This was not the relaxed posture of a peaceful mother, but something much deeper and more troubling. On the back of the photograph there was only a faint, handwritten note in neat lettering. It read, "The Whitmore Family, Boston, Massachusetts, September 1910. Back at her office, the researcher laid the Whitmore family photograph on her desk beneath a strong magnifying lamp. The image was unusually sharp for a photograph taken in 1910, which suggested it had been captured by a professional studio rather than an amateur photographer. This detail would soon become important. She began her search at the Boston City Archives, digging through early 20th century records. The name Whitmore appeared in many places, including property records, business permits, and school enrollment lists. Yet finding clear information about this specific family proved oddly difficult. Most middle-class families from that period left behind a large paper trail. However, the Whitmores seemed to disappear completely from official records after September 1910. A breakthrough came when she contacted Dr. Harold Brennan, a historian at Harvard University who had spent decades studying Boston's immigrant communities during the industrial age. "The Whitmore," Dr. Brennan said over the phone, his voice showing instant recognition. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. They lived in the South End, near what is now the medical district." Dr. Brennan explained that the Whitmore family had been among the more successful residents of their neighborhood. Robert Whitmore owned a small textile import business that supplied fabrics to Boston's growing garment trade. His wife, Eleanor, was known as an educated woman who gave piano lessons to add to the family income. Their 3 children, Thomas, age 14, Mary, 10, and little Samuel, just 4 years old, regularly attended the local Methodist church. "But here's the strange part," Dr. Brennan added. "The family vanished very suddenly in the fall of 1910. The business was sold, the house was left empty, and no one in the neighborhood ever heard from them again." This information sent a chill through the researcher. The photograph was dated September 1910, possibly one of the last images ever taken of the family before they disappeared. Using the address Dr. Brennan provided, she traveled to Boston's South End to see the area where the Whitmores once lived. Much of the neighborhood had changed over the past century, with many Victorian row houses torn down to make room for modern medical buildings. Still, a few older structures remained, their brick fronts standing as quiet reminders of the past. She knocked on doors of the remaining historic homes, hoping to find longtime residents or families who might remember stories passed down through generations. At the 4th house, An elderly woman named Mrs. Dorothy Patterson answered the door. At 87, Mrs. Patterson was the daughter of immigrants who had lived in the area during the early 1900s. My grandmother used to talk about that family, she said, inviting the researcher inside for tea. The Whitmores live 3 houses down from here. My grandmother always said there was something strange about how they left. One day they were there, and the next day the house was empty. Mrs. Patterson led her to an old wooden chest in the living room filled with photographs and documents her family had kept for more than 100 years. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Boston Herald dated October 15, 1910. The headline read, "Local business owner closes shop suddenly, family whereabouts unknown." The short article said that Robert Whitmore had sold his textile business for far less than it was worth, claiming urgent family matters required immediate relocation. No forwarding address was given, and attempts to reach the family failed. The article also noted that Eleanor Whitmore had been deeply involved in church work and local charity, making her sudden absence even more concerning. My grandmother said Mrs. Whitmore seemed scared in the weeks before they disappeared. Mrs. Patterson continued. She stopped coming to church, stopped teaching piano, and the children were no longer seen playing outside. This added another troubling layer to the mystery surrounding the Whitmore family and their sudden disappearance. The researchers' next step was to find the photography studio. Where the family portrait had been taken. The high quality of the image and the formal studio background suggested it came from one of Boston's well-known photographers of that time. After hours of searching through old business directories, she found that only 3 photography studios operated in the South End in 1910. 2 had closed long ago, but the third, Morrison & Sons Photography, had grown into a modern portrait studio still running in downtown Boston. The current owner, James Morrison III, was the great-grandson of the studio's founder. When the researcher visited, she was surprised to learn that the family had carefully preserved detailed business records dating back to 1885. James Morrison III, a man in his 60s with a deep love for photography history, was eager to help. "We have appointment books, customer files, even some original glass plate negatives," he said, as he guided her into the basement archive. "If the Whitmores came here, we should have a record." After searching through leather-bound appointment books, they found it. September 14, 1910. Whitmore family portrait, paid in advance. Special instructions noted. This was unusual since most family portraits followed a standard process. Morrison then found the matching customer file, which included a handwritten note from his great-grandfather. Mrs. Whitmore insisted on multiple exposures, appeared extremely nervous throughout the session, requested no copies be made for public display. Payment included an extra fee for discretion. This discovery raised troubling questions. Why was Eleanor Whitmore so anxious during a normal family photo session? Why did she insist that no public copies be made? And most disturbing of all, what was she staring at during the photograph that pulled her gaze away from the camera? While examining the photograph under different lighting, the researcher noticed the frame looked original to the time period. The ornate brass frame, common in the early 1900s, showed a natural aging that suggested it had never been opened. This led her to inspect the frame more carefully. Using tools borrowed from a professional art restorer, she gently separated the photograph from its backing. What she found made her hands shake. Hidden between the photo and the backing board was a folded piece of yellowed paper that had been there for more than a century. The letter, written in Eleanor Whitmore's neat handwriting, was dated September 13, 1910, just one day before the portrait was taken. Its contents changed everything. "My dearest sister Catherine," it began, "if you are reading this letter, then our worst fears have come true. Robert has uncovered the truth about Mr. Aldrich's business dealings, and we can no longer believe we are safe. The man who has been visiting our home, who calls himself a business associate, is not who he claims to be. Robert has found proof that Mr. Aldrich has been using our textile business to smuggle something far more than imported fabrics." The letter continued. Yesterday evening, Robert showed me documents he had found hidden in Mr. Aldrich's shipments included papers that prove the man was tied to a network of criminals working across New England. We have decided that we must leave Boston at once, but we fear that Mr. Aldrich already suspects Robert knows too much. Tomorrow we will have our family photograph taken, as it may be the last moment we are all together. The final paragraph of the letter was the most frightening of all. I am writing this letter as protection in case something happens to us. I will hide it behind our family photograph, where you might one day find it if you search for answers. During the photograph session, I will try to point toward the place where Robert has hidden the evidence against Mr. Aldrich. Look closely at my eyes in the photograph, dear Catherine. They will show you where to find the truth. This discovery suddenly explained Eleanor Whitmore's unusual behavior during the photo session and revealed why her eyes were fixed beyond the camera. With Eleanor Whitmore's letter giving the missing context, the researcher returned to the family photograph with new clarity. Eleanor's gaze, which had once seemed accidental or unfocused, was actually a planned signal meant for her sister Catherine. The question now was where exactly Eleanor had been looking, and what evidence Robert Whitmore had hidden there. Using modern digital enhancement software, the researcher carefully calculated the angle and direction of Eleanor's gaze in the photograph, based on the position of her and the known layout of the Morrison photography studio. In 1910, Eleanor appeared to be looking toward the studio's front window, directly at the building across the street. The researcher returned to the site of the original Morrison studio, which had been torn down in the 1960s to make room for newer buildings. However, the structure Eleanor had been staring at was still standing. It was a 4-story brick building that had been a boarding house in 1910 and had since been converted into modern apartments. By working with the current building owner and reviewing old property records, the researcher learned that Robert Whitmore had rented a small storage room on the 3rd floor under a false name. According to records from 1910, the space had been paid for 6 months in advance, suggesting Robert had planned the family's escape well before the photograph was taken. The current tenant of the former storage room was a graduate student named Peter Collins. Fascinated by the historical mystery, he agreed to allow a search of the space. Although the room had been remodeled several times over the years, its basic structure had stayed the same. Using Eleanor's gaze in the photograph as a guide, the researcher estimated where her line of sight would have met the building across the street. Behind a section of exposed brick that had never been covered, Peter Collins uncovered something extraordinary. A small metal box had been sealed into the wall more than 100 years early. Inside the box were the documents Robert Whitmore had risked his life to protect, evidence that would finally explain the family's sudden disappearance and the danger they faced in their final days in Boston. The metal box, hidden in the brick wall for over 114 years, contained documents that revealed a dark story of corruption and violence in early 20th century Boston. Robert Whitmore had carefully recorded proof of a criminal network that used honest businesses as cover for illegal operations, including smuggling and extortion. The most important document was a detailed ledger written in Robert's own hand. It showed how his textile import business had been taken over by a man named Harrison Aldrich. According to Robert's notes, Aldrich approached him in early 1910 with promises of profitable overseas fabric contracts. What Robert first believed was a normal business deal slowly exposed itself as something much more dangerous. The ledger showed that Aldrich was using Robert's business to move stolen goods and fake documents throughout New England. Hidden inside shipments of real textiles were forged immigration papers, stolen jewelry, and signs that weapons were being transported to criminal groups in other cities. Without realizing it, Robert had become part of a criminal network stretching from Boston to New York, Philadelphia, and beyond. Dr. Patricia Williams, a historian who specializes in organized crime in early 20th century America, reviewed the documents and confirmed their importance. She explained that what Robert Whitmore uncovered was proof of one of the most advanced criminal networks operating in New England at that time. Harrison Aldrich, she said, was a known associate of several crime groups that controlled illegal activities along the East Coast. The documents also revealed why Eleanor Whitmore had been so afraid. Robert had discovered that other business owners who tried to expose Aldrich's network had suffered strange accidents or had vanished with their families. One newspaper clipping found in the box, dated August 1910, described the death of a Providence businessman who was found drowned in Narragansett Bay just days after questioning Aldrich's business practices. The final document in the box was a short note written by Robert and dated September 12, 1910. Aldrich suspects I know too much. We must leave tomorrow. If something happens to us, this evidence must reach the authorities. This final note explained why the Whitmore family vanished so suddenly and why Eleanor had been so desperate to leave a hidden message in their last family photograph. With Robert Whitmore's evidence uncovered, the researchers searched historical records to learn what happened to the family after they left Boston in September 1910. What she found was both tragic and revealing. In the archives of the Portland Press Herald, she discovered a short article dated September 20, 1910. It read, "Family of 5 perishes in train accident. Ent near Augusta." The article reported that a northbound passenger train had derailed due to suspected sabotage, killing all passengers in 2 cars. Listed among the dead were Robert Whitmore, his wife Eleanor, and their 3 children, traveling under the false name Wilson. Further research showed that this train accident was one of several suspicious incidents along the Boston to Montreal rail line in 1910. A report preserved in state archives suggested the derailment had been caused by loosened rails, but the case was never solved because of limited evidence. Dr. Michael Torres, a transportation historian who studied early railway crimes, confirmed the researchers' conclusions. He explained that criminal groups during that time sometimes used train sabotage to silence witnesses or rivals. The technology existed to make derailments look accidental, and investigations were often limited by the forensic tools of the era. When passenger records were compared with Robert Whitmore's documents, the truth became clear. Harrison Aldrich had learned of the family's escape plan and arranged their deaths before they could reach safety. The Whitmore family's disappearance was not a choice to relocate. It was murder made to look like an accident. The photograph taken just 6 days before their deaths was Eleanor Whitmore's final effort to ensure the truth would someday come out. Her desperate gaze toward the hidden evidence was her last gift to the future, a coded message that took Reithen a century to understand. This discovery turned the simple family portrait into something far more meaningful. It became proof of courage in the face of deadly danger and of a mother's determination to protect others even when she could not save her own children. After uncovering the truth, the researcher contacted modern law enforcement and historical crime experts. Although the criminals were long dead, the evidence offered rare insight into early organized crime. FBI historian Special Agent Maria Rodriguez reviewed Robert Whitmore's documents and confirmed their authenticity. She explained that while crimes from 1910 could not be prosecuted, the information helped historians understand how organized crime developed in America. The documents showed that Harrison Aldrich was part of a larger group known as the Atlantic Circle, which operated criminal businesses from Boston to Baltimore between 1905 and 1915. Law enforcement had suspected the group but never fully exposed it because of how well it hid behind legitimate companies. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a genealogist focused on victim advocacy, helped trace living descendants of the Whitmore family. Eleanor's sister Catherine had died in 1965 without ever learning what happened. However, Catherine's descendants were still living in Massachusetts. Her great-granddaughter, Susan Mitchell, was shocked to learn the truth. She said her family always wondered why Great-Aunt Catherine kept an empty picture frame on her mantel. Catherine had said she was waiting for a photograph that never arrived. Now they understood she was waiting for her sister's family to come home. The researcher arranged for the original Whitmore family photograph to be returned to Susan Mitchell, along with copies of all the discovered evidence. For the first time in over a century, Eleanor Whitmore's message reached its intended family, not her sister Catherine, but Catherine's descendants, who could finally know the truth. This reunion brought emotional closure to a mystery that had remained unsolved for 114 years. Eleanor's eyes, once seen as haunting and fearful, could now be understood as the loving gaze of a mother making sure her family's story would survive. What began as a simple estate sale purchase for $25 revealed a powerful story of courage, sacrifice, and determination that echoed across generations. Working with the Boston Historical Society, the researcher organized an exhibition titled Hidden Messages: How One Photograph Revealed a Century-Old Crime. The display featured the original Whitmore family portrait alongside Robert's hidden documents and evidence of the criminal network that cost the family their lives. Thousands of visitors attended the exhibition, many inspired by Eleanor Whitmore's clever and brave way of leaving a message for the future. Photography experts admired how she communicated vital information through the direction of her eyes alone. Historians praised Robert Whitmore's careful records, while Susan Mitchell and her family attended the opening, finally honoring ancestors who died trying to protect others. Susan said Eleanor and Robert Whitmore were ordinary people placed in an impossible situation, and they chose to do what was right, even knowing the cost. The case also encouraged modern investigators to re-examine other historical crimes using new methods. The approach used to decode Eleanor's message, combining historical research, genealogy, and modern technology, became a model for solving other old mysteries. Most of all, the Whitmore family story proved that even the most ordinary photographs can hold extraordinary secrets. Eleanor Whitmore's eyes, once thought to be distracted, were actually carrying a message across time, a symbol of a mother's love and a family's courage that refused to be erased. Today, the photograph hangs in Susan Mitchell's home, no longer a mystery, but a tribute to brave ancestors whose sacrifice helped expose a dangerous criminal network. Eleanor Whitmore's eyes finally reached their destination. Not only her sister Catherine, but everyone who learns from her family, sacrifice, and understands that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface.